My brothers and sisters and my beloved confreres, a very hearty welcome to each one of you to this Recollection talk. The world famous author Rutger Bregman, in his very famous book titled Humankind, A Hopeful History, narrates the dialogue between a grandfather and a grandson. The old man tells his grandson, "My child, do you know there are two animals living inside of me? One is very violent and aggressive, but the other one is very calm and gentle." The little child was very curious and he asked the question, "Grandpa, tell me, which among them will win the fight?" And the old man said, "The one you feed. The one you feed." As my brothers and my sisters, this is about human life and in very particular about our religious life. Today I would like to concentrate and recollect with you some fundamental challenges that we are facing in our religious and priestly way of life. All of us know how noble this way of life to priesthood and religious life is. And all of us have chosen it because of a conviction that emerged inside of us. And the total concentration that we had from the very beginning of our religious way of life is to follow Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life, and to live in accordance with the principles and values that He has given to us in and through the scriptures, the traditions of the church, the doctrines of the church, and the liturgy of the church. Are we true to this commitment? Looking at the modern world and the way things are happening in and around us, we would be rather flabbergasted to know that many things that are happening with us and without us are not in accordance with the religious principles that we believe in. Therefore, I would like to title this recollection talk, "The Shadows in Our Religious Life." You know very well, every shadow lessens the brightness. So too, shadows in religious life lessen the brightness of religious life itself. We need to see some of those things that are affecting our way of life. To that extent, very many of us get thwarted in our purposes. Look at the whole world today. And why to go around? Look into our own society here in India. In the recent times, how many religious and priests have committed suicide? Are we not affected by these happenings around us? Are they not a potential threat to our own convictions and to our own way of life? And therefore it's an important invitation for each one of us to reflect on these shadows in religious life today so that we would be able to address them with convictions and courage. Yes, my brothers and my sisters, I would like to place before you 5 shadows that can be potentially a danger for each one of us. The very first shadow in religious life is moral relativism. Moral relativism means there is no absolute truth or there is no absolute finality. Truth is always subjective. I decide in accordance with the customs and culture in which I am living. And therefore, I am not affected by the so-called universal truth. If you believe something else, have it for yourself. do not disturb my convictions. For example, take the case of abortions in the world. Every individual state or country decides for itself a certain law and then implements it in accordance with their state policies. But today, the Catholic Church would with conviction say abortion is not permissible. It's against life and it's against the policy of the Church's teaching and it's against God's plan for humanity. And as a consequence, I need to listen to this voice of the Church in the context of my own life. So too, cases like euthanasia and many others. People take subjective decisions about a common policy of life. Absolute truth is valid even today. As a consequence of rejecting the absolute truth, that is God Himself, I begin to make kingdoms of my own. And as a consequence, I fall victim of my selfish, subjective desires and designs. Is this not a challenge for you and for me today? When it comes to morality, the Church has clear-cut teachings about them. The Church would say the last word concerning certain moral principles in accordance with the values set by the book, the Holy Bible. And we are bound to live it in the context of our life. So, this shadow of moral relativism has got a lasting consequence in the life of each one of us. Let's now see what is the consequence of moral relativism. It leads to a tendency called activism. What is activism? I begin to feel a sense of vacuum within myself. When I understand the subjective truth that I held until now as the truth of my life is not standing in principle and is not supporting my belief system, I begin to falter. I begin to understand there is something that is strange with me. As a consequence, I enter into a sense of activism. That means addiction to certain things. It could perhaps be work. I try to avoid all other thoughts within me by engaging myself in a particular trade or work. But how long can I go on working and doing? Is there not a time meant for being? And that exactly is the challenge that we have today. Yes, my brothers, my sisters, very many of us fall victim of activism today, although outwardly we are not proclaiming against moral relativism. But subjectively, very often moral relativism creeps inside of us and we fall victim to untoward happenings of our own lives. Some of us get addicted to alcohol. Some of us get addicted to relationships. Some of us get addicted to work. Some of us get addicted to socializations. And as a consequence, I do not have an idea as to what is it that I am standing for today. Moral relativism and the consequent activism. Am I a victim of it? A second aspect of shadows in religious life is individualism. If you look into the past ancient history of our own country and the world at large, what was emphasized was collectivism. Look at the joint family system. Of course, today they are no more in existence. But some of them who have lived in joint families have always narrated about the wonderful experiences they had. Father, mother, uncle, auntie, grandparents, grandchildren, cousins, everyone living together, sharing from the same table and enjoying life with all its consequences. It does not mean that there aren't difficult moments in the life of people who live together. Even basically, the concept of our community life is based on this aspect of collectivism, joining together, putting the hands together, living together. There is no chance for individualistic tendencies. Even when there is a quarrel between the family members, one would stand by the common policy and say that give it up is for our good. And that's where corrections, suggestions, and advices help them to live together in collectivity. But think about the nuclear families of today. We have maximum 1 or 2 children, and the way we rear them are in fact a sign of the future danger. We give them every possibilities, even struggling ourselves in order to provide our children with good things in the world. We are forgetting to form them in the proper way. That's why, although in a joking manner, many would say, we have today only noodle boys and noodle girls. Our children have not experienced the struggles and problems of life. As a consequence, they develop a subjective conscience, a subjective mindset where the other is considered to be an intruder. Even the next door, I do not know who is living. Privacy of life is much more important than social way of relationship and communication with the other. Think about a religious who is falling into this trap of individualism. My brothers and sisters, this is one of the greatest dangers of the modern era, where many of us are falling victims of individualism. Subjective interests are safeguarded at the cost of common policies and principles of life. Am I a victim of individualistic tendencies? And what is the consequence of such an individualism? The consequence is over concern for efficiency. Please note that word that I used, efficiency. Efficiency, I would say, is meant for machines and not for human beings. Human beings are not called to be efficient, they are called to be effective. A machine has to be efficiently working, but a human person has to work effectively. Very often, this attitude towards efficient way of life is leading to unchristian practices in the context of our religious life. We become more and more violent in our approach to the other. Think about many of the institutions that we are running. When our policies and principles are not in accordance with the Christian values of service, love, and commitment, it becomes merely an institution to provide us with profit and advantage. If we do not permit a child to be promoted because our standard of the school will be coming down, it is an unchristian practice of subjective interest with efficient mindset. Are you today effective in your commitment? The consequence of individualism is creeping into our ministries. Most of us become efficient people, but not at all effective. I had a wonderful experience in the very first year of my priesthood as I was working in a parish. It was the time of the publishing of the results of the 10th standard SSLC examinations. And on that day, it used to be a big celebration in accordance with the rank the children are gaining from the examination. As I was in the presbytery, I heard a loud cry from the neighborhood house. I rushed in there. It was the father, the mother, and the daughter who were there in the scene. Now, the girl was crying aloud. I immediately went to the father and the mother and asked them what happened to her. And they told me, you ask her. I went near her and asked her the question, what is the problem now? What happened? And she was not answering. Finally, the mother told me, she says that she did not get sufficient mark for the SSLC. I told her, my child, is that the problem? How much mark did you get? She was not answering. Then in order to appease her, I just calmly told her, you know, even I did not get much mark for SSLC examination. She looked at me so violently, indirectly meaning that's why you became a priest. Finally, I asked her, how much did you get? And she says, 480. And you know, out of 600, she has scored 480 marks. That's distinction. Still, the child is crying aloud saying, I did not get sufficient mark. I looked at the parents a bit angrily and I told them, take care of your child. I came back to the presbytery. As I came there, some of the youth were playing cricket there. I joined them, and as we were playing cricket, a small boy from the neighborhood comes with a handful of chocolate. And we asked him, what is the celebration now? And he says, I managed it, Father. What is that? I passed the SSLC examination. How much? 210 mark. He just got 210 marks and standing before me like the Prime Minister of India and telling, I managed it, Father. I'm just seeing the difference of approach in life. Today, they both are grown-ups, mature people. And when I tally them both in their quality of life, I would rate this boy with 210 mark a bit higher than the girl with 480 marks. Efficiency against effectiveness. The quality of your life has to be much more based on collectivism and understanding what I gain is also for the other. Your subjective interests will not support you further. A third shadow that we would find in the context of our religious life that affects us is consumerism as a lifestyle. Yes, my brothers and sisters, this is one of the serious threats that all of us are facing in our day-to-day life. When I look around, when I look at my own self, I find that there is a consumeristic attitude that is getting developed inside of me. Everything that I evaluate and I look at is with a profit-mindedness. And I want this, I want that. And I think in terms of getting and getting, never in terms of giving up. Even the quality of the vehicles that we use today, the kind of gadgets that we use today, and the kind of mindset that we share after having used them with one another are danger points for us to evaluate where are we heading to. Consumerism has become one of the greatest threats for religious life today. Most of us have excuses of our own, but we need to really think in this way. Are they really needs or are they merely wants? Mahatma Gandhi would say, to be happy, we need to limit our wants and address our needs. Yes, my brothers, my sisters, there's a great danger lying in front of us if we are not aware of these consumeristic tendencies that we are developing. Even look at our dining tables. When millions and millions of people are struggling around us, the quality of food that we are privileged to enjoy should challenge us today. Why am I here? I'm here to be a missionary to serve the other. Does it serve the purpose? My life should be the gospel. Am I proclaiming the gospel? The consequence of such kind of consumeristic mindset is thirst for immediate result. People who are so much affected by personal interest, subjective gaining, and personal involvement in things that will affect them positively are always people who look for immediate results. Yes, I want to buy a car today. If you do not permit me for that, I would take my route. I want to get these things done today. And if that does not get permitted, I would have my way of acting. Yes, my brothers and sisters, are they not principles that are questioning us? Are we really realistic about the choices that we are making? Many of us fall victim of consumerism and the consequent thirst for immediate result. I have seen that among even little children. In the recent times, there was a mention about a politician's son committing suicide. And his age was just 13 years. The reason was his mother got angry with him because he was not studying well. As a result, the boy was totally upset. He goes into the room, hangs himself to death. When things do not happen in accordance with my wish and my fancies, I become angry, I do anything, even committing suicide. Yes, my brothers and sisters, we need to be aware of this threat of consumeristic mindset and the consequent thirst for immediate result. Are you affected by these? A fourth shadow that would affect religious life today is wrong notion of secularism. I'm not challenging the concept of a secular society. Secularism clearly means that state and religious principles or religious values and systems do not mingle with each other. But they are not merely replacement for atheistic mindset. Very often, under the umbrella of secularism, very many of us develop an atheistic mindset. Every secular nation should have the religious and moral principle to allow its own countrymen, citizens, to follow the religious values in accordance with his or her conscience. And that exactly is secularism. It promotes, but at the same time, it stands apart. And that kind of a secularism is not seen in our world today. Very many of us fall victim of atheistic mindset, even being religious and priest today. We do not understand that. We follow political principles without having religious values. Think of a situation. In the context of the management of a school, I take up religious values as merely a shadow. I do not give importance to that. But getting back to my religious community, I suddenly become a priest, celebrate Mass. But these principles of celebrating the Mass, living religious values in my community, if they are not practiced in the context of my ministry, they are merely atheistic mindset. We should apply religious values and principles in the contextual situations of our ministries. We religious and priests run schools, colleges, social work centers, humanitarian managements only because we believe in Jesus Christ. Are we doing that? And the consequence of such secularistic mindset, without mingling religious and religious values inside of that, is the difficulty to collaborate with common policies. We have a good number of religious and priests who find it very difficult to abide by obedience in religious communities. Basically because we have developed also a social mindset without religious principles. I'm not willing to do that. I cannot collaborate with this kind of an idea. These are all pre-Vatican mindset. Some of those statements have to be nuanced out even today. Are we trying to establish an individual kingdom, or are we going in accordance with the religious principles of the four pillars of the scripture, the traditions, the doctrines, and the liturgy of the church? We have to abide by the constitutional rules and regulations of our congregations. Without that, we can never proclaim gospel values. Collaborating with common concerns of our religious communities and the religious congregation is a must for a religious. Evaluate for yourself. Are you affected by the negative notion of secularism and the consequent difficulty in collaborating with common policies? And the final shadow, the fifth shadow that I would depict before you is a tendency called to be like a bourgeois. This term emerges from the medieval French traditions, which means a middle class family which has got its own system of functioning without getting integrated with any other. Later, it became even a communist manifesto. Marxian philosophy would highlight this bourgeois mindset when the working class is turning against the bourgeois, the so-called middle class and the rich. Is it the happening today? Are we religious today becoming bourgeois in the context of our religious life? Are we like politicians handling the institutions, the ministries that are entrusted to us? Are we dealing with the other with a sense of kindness and compassion? Even to those parents who come into our communities, into our institutions, seeking for some help from us, are we becoming aggressive and violent to them like bourgeois? We need to see our ministries are meant for concerns regarding the people's lives. We are here to work for the humanity. Therefore, the good of the humanity has to be encouraged through our very way of life. The consequence of bourgeois mindset is a thirst for leadership role. Look at the kind of situations that are happening in religious congregations and communities, campaigning to elect the provincial and the superior general. And such kind of tendencies can always show us how degraded we are in the so-called secular mindset without holding up religious principles. Earlier times, there was a very valuable lifestyle proposed by the medieval ages. And that is, when someone writes a book, they were not even permitted to write their name as the author. That's why very many books of the medieval ages are anonymous, written by authors who are unknown. And this is something that we need to imbibe inside of us. Yes, my brothers and sisters, today we need to have this attitude. My commitment to the values of the gospel has to be explicated through my personal involvement with the people of God in compassion and kindness, without suppressing them and without thirsting for leadership roles for myself. My brothers and sisters, I have presented before you 5 kinds of shadows that we can find in our religious life today and the consequences of these shadows which are happening in our life. I conclude with an experience narrated by the late President of India, Abdul J. Kalam. As he was visiting one of the schools and interacting with the children in the school, a little girl got up and asked him a question. Mr. President, tell me, who is a terrorist? Is he an Indian? Is he a Pakistani? When I go home, my parents tell me, my child, be careful about the terrorists. When I come to the school, my teachers tell me, my child, be aware of the terrorists. As the president of our country, tell me, who is a terrorist? Abdul J. Kalam, known for his in-depth knowledge, was flabbergasted by the question raised by this girl. It is said he did not give her an immediate answer, but within a short while, a new book came out titled Ignited Minds. And in that book, Abdul J. Kalam writes, in every one of us, there is a terrorist and a saint. It all depends. Whom do you allow to live inside of you? The saint or the terrorist? Evaluating the various shadows of our religious life today, we must be able to look into ourselves and say, do I permit the terrorist or the saint to live inside of me? Choice is yours. Amen.